first time we ever spoke about a school was my pastor, C. Ernest Tatham, said to me, "When are you going to build us a school across the street?" And my answer to Mr. Tatham was, "Mr. Tatham, I can get the buildings up, but I don't know how we'd run that crazy thing after we got it up." He called me, maybe 6 weeks later, and he said, "Nelson," he says, I've gotten in contact with a man that has helped start a lot of Christian schools, and he's coming down, and I'm going to meet with him." I says, "Well, that's great." I says, I hope it's a good meeting." He called me back after the man was done, and he says, "I think this man can be of a help to us." The first thought was that we were going to have this as a church school. Palm Bible Chapel was going to start the school. We brought Dr. Harris down and met with our elders. And after he met with the elders had a meeting, and a couple of the elders said, "You know, if a Christian school is really going to touch the community, it has to be broader based than one church." And that was probably one of the wisest decisions that was ever made for the King's Academy.
We went to a meeting that was called at Palm Bible Chapel for praying about starting a Christian school. And my husband and I went. We had 2 little girls, 2 and 3, but it was so challenging because Dr. Kai Harris was there, and at the end of that meeting I looked at Ben and I said, "I don't know if I'll ever be good enough to teach at the King's Academy," because his standards were so high for the heart that he had. And Mr. Vermont had written books, and he had started a lot of Christian schools in the country. The
founding board, as I believe it was, is myself. I was the chairman. There was James Erneston, Lewis Jones, Lloyd Prouty, Ray Shiplet, C. Ernest Tatham, Donald Tillman, and Ken Whitaker.
So they had a banquet, and they decided that if they could get pledges of $30,000 that night, that was the sign from God to go ahead. And we did.
After we tallied up and come up with the $33,000 mark, we went outside to get a little privacy so we could talk, and it was just drizzling. It was a little cold night that night, and we talked and we said, well, the Lord certainly has given us the right amount of money, and our decision was that night that we'd go ahead and make that commitment and do that. So we circled around, held hands, and each man prayed, and we committed the project to the Lord.
And then they used my husband's office in Riviera Beach. He had one in office. He moved to Lake Park, and they had interviews there, you know, for prospective students.
We had to have some place to interview the kids and test the kids, so we rented some offices up in Riviera.
In 1970, my husband Gary Gerald and I were praying for a Christian school. And little did we know, at that same time, there were several godly men on their knees every single week praying for a Christian school. And because of their faithfulness and they never gave up. And they prayed constantly that God would make a way for us to have a Christian school. And because of them, the King's Academy was born.
I saw the hand of God in these godly men who were on that founding board of governors. People like C. Ernest Tatham and Don Tillman and Gary Gerald and Mr. Shiplet. They did things well, and they did them right, and they did them to the glory of God.
So the next problem was, where were we going to have it? We looked. I looked, and the other board members looked. We looked all over, and every time we meet with someone, there'd be some reason why they couldn't accommodate us. And one day when I was going to one of my jobs, because I was an electrical contractor, I turned down a street, and I don't know why in the world I turned down that street that day, because that's not where I was going. And I come down about 2 blocks, and there sat Belvedere Baptist Church. And I looked at that, and they had a nice auditorium, and then they had a big two-story Sunday school classroom. And I said to myself, I think maybe that could be a place where we could start a school. So I went back to my office and called Ken Whitlock, who knew every pastor in town. He was head of child evangelism at that time. And I asked him if he knew that man, and he said yes. And I said, well, that building looks like we could start in there. He says, I'll get him to meet with you, and he says, I'll come along. I said, if that's fine. I said, that's good. I need all the support I can get. So we sat down with that pastor, and we told him what we were going to do, what we were hoping to do, and he said right there, you can have the church. And I, knowing Baptists, I said, what are you going to do about your deacons? He says, I'll take care of my deacons. And we opened that year, and that was 1970. It was September before we got started. We opened the school with 196 students, and when the school year was over, we were up to about 248 or 49, some number there. We had gained quite a few students.
There were students in grades K4 through 11th grade, and they used this whole facility. We had chapel once a week, and we had a lot of spectacular speakers come in, and there was a lot of good memories. My husband worked with the choir, and the kids just blossomed in the choir.
And so they had teachers doing the high school choir and the elementary choir. That was it. They had a high school choir and an elementary choir.
We had a music man, Larry Davies, that came in, and he
and his wife,
both of them, and they jumped in, and they put their heart into the school and worked very hard.
They were looking for someone who could come in and build this music program. And so when I came and had the opportunity, it was a blessing, had an opportunity to start on the ground floor.
Of course, while we were there, we realized that building wasn't going to suffice us. I mean, it was accommodated the first year, but we didn't have any room for growth, so we started to look for a piece of property. And we had a real estate person that had kids in the school, and they helped us out. And they looked for property, and they said we need to take a look at Roger Dean's horse farm. And of course, the board says, well, there's no way in the world we can afford that farm. It's just too much money. So we looked here and we looked there, and nothing panned out. So finally we said, well, we're at the end of the rope, so we'll go see Roger Dean and see what the whole thing is all about. We met with him. He was a car dealer, a big car dealer here in West Palm Beach at that time. And he sat down with us and he said, I want $373,000 for the property. And that consisted of a big barn and a house and a cottage that really was made into 2 apartments. And there was 25 acres connected with that piece of property at that time. He says, I want $373,000. He says, I want $100,000 down, and I will take the mortgage. That business of him taking the mortgage was a big opening for us, because we had nothing. All the tuition we got, we were plowing right back into the school.
They were building this new campus, and when I arrived, they handed me a paintbrush and said, we're going to start painting some classrooms.
And the interesting thing about that campus was that it was actually a horse stable. It was a horse farm. And the library was his house, and the school building was actually the barn.
A couple of people told me, he says, you'll never get the stench of those horses out of that stable. You'll smell them the whole time the building's up.
They had a stable that was being converted into classrooms, and it was still a stable. And here we are in the end of June, and school's going to start in September, and I'm looking around wondering what's happening here. So we worked that whole summer.
And we gutted that stable and made it into classrooms, and the main office was in the center. We chopped up the house, and my wife never can get over the fact that we walked on that beautiful rug that they had put in that house. The kids running in and out on it. We made the apartment into 2 small classrooms that year. later I think we made them enlarged and made it into one.
And I remember that the night and the afternoon before our first day of school on that campus, we were clearing Australian pine trees and roots out of the way so we could have a road, that circular drive to go through the campus. And we were glad when school started, because then the physical work kind of dropped off and we were able to do schoolwork.
And there really was a sense of the faculty wanting to reach students for Christ.
And a desire to see Christian education make an impact on Palm Beach County.
1971, we opened up in our new campus on Cherry Road.
One of our best memories would be the camaraderie with the students and the teachers, and especially the teaching from Mr. and Mrs. Vermont.
I can remember beginning schools with "The King is Coming," and that was the song at that time, and he was very motivational, encouraging, loved music, and it played a big part for us as teachers, you know, the excitement of getting ready and being able to teach these students about Christ.
Victory Drill was, I think it was designed by Mr. Vermont, and I think it's still around. You can still get the books, and a lot of the old alumni will remember Victory Drill.
And that helped us be able to read words from short ones to long ones, and we memorized them as the years went by.
I am 42 years old and went through the Victory Drill book, and to this day I can tell you what page 51 is: pat, tan, map.
It was a lot of reading, timed reading of just words on a page, and man, I'll tell you, kids would get so uptight about that. I had to do it in the 8th grade. Man, I hated that.
I was not an educator, but we had a man named Mr. Vermont on the staff at that time, and he was our headmaster. And he was a man of God, and he loved the kids, and he'd get down on the floor and play with the elementary kids. He played the musical saw, and they loved that.
It was one of the old style pull saws, rectangular shape, and he knew how to bend it and play it. Sounded like a harp. It was quite something.
Between the Vermonts and the Harrises, it was a very uplifting, growing experience being at the school.
As the school grew and as we improved in areas, we looked to hire others with maybe a little more expertise. I remember when we hired Mrs. Basham for the choir. She was outstanding. What a great vocalist and a vocal teacher. And she did things with the choir that I could never do because I didn't have that vocal expertise that she had. We hired Randy Kyle to come in and do the bands, and he had real expertise in working with the band, worked with the marching band. I worked with him, and my wife has real expertise when it comes to children's music. So she taught at King's for 10 years doing the children's choirs.
Well, singing wasn't one of my talents, but I was part of his people, and I kind of snuck in the back door. And the way I did that was I played the trumpet, and I was first trumpet in the band, or one of the first trumpets. And so we weren't big enough to have a marching band like we have today, but we did have a concert band.
I know when we started His People, our goal was to see that as an opportunity to minister and to bear testimony. And it was exciting that those early years, giving a testimony and sharing your faith was an integral part of His People.
Back then, His People was not only singing like it is today, but we also traveled with, because we actually